Hello, English 50. Are you there? Are you in there somewhere? I look much better in person than I do on camera. I keep looking at these once in a while. Not the whole thing, that'd be vain. But the camera doesn't do me any good. I think I'm better looking than that. But that doesn't matter. That's a non sequitur. It has no bearing on the actual conclusion that I'm trying to make here. So we have a couple of tests before us, and I really want to help you with these. First one is the paper. So we've tackled this controversy, safe zone controversy. And even though it's sort of a dead issue, it's not really, because you can go back and say either it should have been enacted, it should have been put into practice, or it should not have, or many other options, right? Another option is that it could have been put into place, enacted, but in a different format, in a different version of it, okay? So it could have been modified. So let's look at thesis statement. First and foremost, you've got to make a thesis statement, an argumentative thesis. So that shouldn't be that difficult. This is the magic word, should or should not. So you can do this point blank, like I already suggested. Should or should not have been actually enacted, okay, or adopted by the city council as a resolution, and the safe zone should have been actually put into place on the Burton school campuses. So, or this is really a great option. You're going to love me for this. This is called subordination. And that means that you use a word like the subordinated conjunction although in your thesis, and you say something like, although it has lots of merit, comma, so you're giving a nod to the other side. Although it has lots of merit, comma, the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. Now, I'm not saying take that position. Take whatever one you want. The disadvantages to adopting a safe zone outweigh the advantages. Or flip it around. And you see what you're doing? You've already set up your argument, haven't you? Now, for this time, I suppose you can actually use modified versions of my thesis statements. But you see how, I mean, that was not painful. Should not have been. So you flesh out your first paragraph, maybe with the background of the controversy, the turmoil, and give a little bit of background about that. That may carry on into your second paragraph, but classic position for the thesis is where? Did I hear you? Yeah, that's right. That's right. At the end of the first paragraph. That's not the only position for it, but it is a classic position. You with me so far? Good. I'm glad. All right. So your paper consists of presenting your arguments and refuting, or at least addressing, the counter arguments. So if your arguments have to do with, let's say we're taking the should position. You're trying to show, this is like a scales. You're weighing these arguments and evaluating them, and evaluating any evidence that's out there, and seeing if one side is heavier than the other. That's really what it amounts to, because you're trying to come across as a person who can make rational arguments and not simply throw out the emotional ones or the colorful ones, or play to the crowd, you know, the appeal to the emotions, like grow up hair. What kind of argument is that? It really seems to be lots of logical fallacies combined. Sorry, Mr. Mayor, but no question about it. Good source of logical fallacies. So, all right. So we get into the arguments. We list the arguments. Go through the arguments. What are the arguments? Well, obviously, if you're going to say should have been, then one of the arguments is that it would provide a safe haven for kids who are bullied. And I mean, you go back to some of the horrific consequences of bullying on the other side of it, like Columbine and many, many others. We can go on and on with those. But so, I mean, one of the arguments is that by doing this, maybe, I mean, you can't make this case airtight, but maybe you're helping prevent another kid who is bullied from reacting in some sort of dangerous, uh, violent way. But at the very least, you could make the argument. I'm not saying this is correct. You could make the argument that these safe zones will help protect kids from being bullied, especially those that are often bullied. Okay, so you can make that argument. You can make the argument that it encourages a campus that is more conscious of respecting and even celebrating our differences instead of picking out kids who are different and making them the target of ridicule. That in fact could help do that. That it would make the campus overall perhaps a safer place. I don't know that this is true. This is speculation, but you can make many of these arguments. Okay, in the interest of time, I've got to move on because these cannot become too long or they're really tough to upload. So you would go through a number of those arguments. What are the counter arguments? Now you see your papers beginning to be set up. So you go into depth and detail on supporting those arguments. But you cannot be blind and should not be blind to the opposition arguments. And here's where before I talked to a chair. So I want to get my chair over here and talk to a chair. Here's my chair. Not showing very well. Sort of like Clint Eastwood talking to a chair. But the empty chair represents the counter arguments. You have to hear those. You have to be aware of those. So one of the counter arguments is, well, look, you're drawing attention to the people who are in the safe zone, and you're making them more of a target by drawing attention to them than otherwise. And that sort of Darwinian argument that the mayor brought out, if you couch it in more acceptable terms, it could be made that you can argue that, well, you're weakening these people. They're not standing up for themselves, or they're going into a kind of retreat mode, if you want to put it that way. And so I'm talking to my chair here, because my chair is talking to me, and now I have to answer that argument. Well, what's the answer to that? Well, no, you can say, well, it's not weakening anybody to go into a special place where they are protected. And why not? Well, you can go into that if you choose to, because you can say, well, wait a minute, it's symbolic. It's not. I'm getting off the camera. It is not necessarily. I'm supposed to look at the camera, by the way. It's not necessarily making those people somehow less masculine, less feminine, less assertive. Far from it. Maybe overall it can be shown that it draws together the campus community to make a more friendly place to be. Okay, you go into those arguments, you look at evidence, any evidence that exists out there. Did you look up whether or not other schools and other locations have safe zones? If they have them, do they work? In what ways do they work? That's a huge, huge area that you can tap into. You have so much that you can go into here. There's so much that you can say. Okay? So consider that. All right. So you develop the essay by launching your arguments, by backing your arguments, but by then addressing the counter arguments as well. Format can go all kinds of different ways. You can have a block of your essay for your arguments, used to be called the pros, okay, and a block for the cons. But don't be schizophrenic about it. What's the best way? How does a conversation work? Right? Look at your conversations book. How does it work? Well, it works with a back and forth. It doesn't work with this, okay, now we're going to have this huge extended section and everybody else has to stand aside while we put the cons and then the pros, and by that time the reader's asleep. Probably because you haven't interacted with those. I would suggest that you need to begin interacting with the arguments fairly early on. And that you begin, if you're going to put a strong argument in there, look at the upside and the downside of that strong argument early on. So you use your reasoning. You have this powerful capability, which I've been alluding to often. Okay. Hope that helps. I'm still looking for that student to step up and send a really good example of your draft that you're working on, that we can shape that and put that out there as this is what you're working on, because we want to do this early. Obviously, never signed this topic before. So I want to now refer to your test, because I told you I try to give you some help on that, and so indeed I am. It's all based on the logical fallacies, and of course that ties in here. We haven't had time to go into different types of arguments, inductive, deductive, and so on, but we hope to get to that later. But your little quiz this week is on your logical fallacies. So you have that very nice little video, or the little PowerPoint on that. Go into that. There's so many of them, right? Appeal to popularity. Oh, gee, you know, everybody is doing what? Everybody's going to get drunk on Friday. So what's the matter with you? Are you going to just hang back and not be part of the crowd? You know, we hear this all the time, don't we? And so it's this business of popularity, and that if everybody else is going along with it, why aren't you? Ad hominem. That's an attack on the person. Yeah, Mr. Wise's glasses are awfully thick. He probably doesn't really know what he's doing when he gets behind the wheel of a car. He's probably not a good driver. So we're going to attack the individual based on some character trait, for example, something that well, that person wears, or you know, the way the person dresses, and all this kind of thing. Hasty generalizations, we hear those all the time. Oh, I just made one. I hear them all the time. This is the biggest offense to logic that we ever see in a student-written essay. That something happens all the time, right? And I think this is because this is one that's so often committed on quote-unquote respected even news programs. That teachers always do this, students always do this. It's that whole spiel that we hear so frequently. A certain segment of the population always behaves in a certain way. There are many of these appeal to authority. Isn't that sweet? Well, you know, because Frank, you know, my contractor did the remodel on my house, really said that, you know, the way we're handling this ISIS situation, or ISIL, is really not, it's not at all going to work. What we need to do is bomb them to smithereens. You got to find him first, Frank. But we're going to quote Frank and say, well, it's not being handled well. Is he an expert on foreign policy? No. He's a contractor, and he happens to be a crooked one anyway. And there I go with an ad hominem attack on Frank. But, you know, you go through these. Okay, here's the deal. Look for the language. Look for how the example is set up. If it's set up to indicate that something happened after something else because of that prior event, you know you probably got a possibility for a post hoc, right? After this, therefore, because of this. After this, therefore, because of this, right? So you really look for those. Look for the wording, and if something is going to claim, well, something always happens in a certain way, always, without exception, you know you're going to have a hasty generalization. They're not that tough. Go over the examples in the little slideshow. Ye shall do very, very well. I'm confident of it. All right, hope that helps. We're going to try to send more help your way very soon in the form of a student-written draft. And I've talked for too long already, so I will say my fond farewells. Bye.